What is your take on these closer ties? How significant they really are? The pomposity was there, all the imagery was there, but is this material for Putin?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a big deal. It's a huge deal for North Korea, which has been a very isolated state, the most isolated state on the planet, essentially. And, for a long time, they had more leeway with Russia and China than they did with the West. But nevertheless, they were under pretty tight control, and the Russians had helped with, signed off on all kinds of sanctions in the UN and so on. So that is now all in question. And for the North Koreans, they will now have access to all kinds of things that they haven't had before, technologically and so on. Russia is a developed nation, and so massive for North Korea, and you could see that in the way that Putin was received. For Russia, it's also a very big deal. North Korea, wars we're discovering in Ukraine, we're reminding ourselves are, yes, about technology, but they're also just about mass. And the way that, ex-Soviet forces such as the Russians and the Ukrainians both fight is via artillery, far more than we do, or the Americans. What really matters is that the North Koreans have vast stocks of compatible artillery shells, rocket for multiple rocket launchers, munitions that the Russians can use. And equally important is that they share a border. So all of that can just be shipped over land, and there is really nothing that the US or anybody else can do to intervene.
So there's nothing they can do to intervene in terms of the US and its allies, who presumably are looking at this with pretty significant anxiety. When it comes to the timeframes then, because US and European equipment is being delivered to the Ukrainians as we speak, do the Russians get that additional munition ability come through before that equipment is on the ground? How is it playing out in terms of the rush for munitions, the rush for kit for both of these sides?
Yeah. I mean, clearly there is a race on, and I don't know the details of everything that is going to be delivered and what the timeframes would be on that. But in terms of artillery shell stocks, and these kinds of, weapons, they can be delivered very quickly, and they have been. We're talking millions of shells. So the North Koreans can deliver this stuff faster than the Europeans and Americans can make it, for sure. Then, we get into sort of much more murky areas where we talk about short-range ballistic missiles. Supposedly, we don't know for sure. We think that, more of those will be on the way. That would be important, a kind of answer to ATACMS and things like that. But I don't know what the time frame on that would be.
Yeah. There's some have suggested this is also a sign that Putin is increasingly isolated, that Russia is increasingly isolated, the fact that they have to go to the North Koreans for this kind of support. What do you read into that analysis? This is a weak and cut-off Putin.
I would say that is slightly delusional. What we're seeing is Putin finding a very useful ally. It is an ally that we, have very little time for. It is a very strange state, rather poor state, but it's highly militarized, and it is useful. I think you need to not think about, yes, well, this is a sign of weakness. Of course it is, in the sense that, he's cut off his relations with his biggest market in Europe. These are economic disasters in the medium and long term. They're terrible for Russia. But in the short term, these are very important security moves that he's making.
Does North Korea become more of a risk to South Korea and Japan? You made the point that Russia was one of the signatories to these UN sanctions. Putin's come out in the last couple of hours and said those sanctions need to be rethought.
Yeah.
The consequences of South Korea and Japan?
I think they are very significant again, and it may be one reason why there's some speculation that the Chinese are quite nervous about all this, because they don't really want anything to persuade the North Koreans and the Japanese that it's time for them to acquire nuclear weapons. So it's complicated, but I would say yes, that it's significant there too.